Okay, think about this for a second. When was the last time you felt something really strong? Maybe a big wave of joy, or that sharp sting of sadness, or even just that quiet, almost neutral feeling you sometimes get. We tend to just react, don't we? We feel these things, but maybe we don't really understand them deep down. Well, what if I told you there's this ancient roadmap, a really detailed guide specifically for dissecting these sensations? In this tradition, they're called Vedanā. So today we're doing a deep dive into this concept. It's pretty foundational in the Saṃyutta Nikāya, especially in a section called the Vedanāsaṃyuttaṃ.
That's right. And the sources we're drawing on, they're incredibly rich. We're looking at excerpts from texts like Sagavāgo, Rahogātavāgo, and Āttisatthapariyyāvāgo. And these aren't just, dusty old documents. They offer a surprisingly practical way to navigate our own inner landscape.
Yeah, exactly. So our goal here, for you listening, is to unpack some of these ancient ideas, see how relevant they still are, and maybe discover how looking closely at feelings could actually change how you experience life. Might be a few aha moments in here that shift your perspective on what feeling even means. All right, let's start at the beginning, the absolute core. This teaching, it starts pretty simply, right? There are basically three main types of feelings.
Precisely. Yeah, the texts are very consistent on this. They always identify these three: pleasant feelings, sukhā vedanā, then painful feelings, dukkhā vedanā, and finally, neither pleasant nor painful feelings, adukkhamasukhā vedanā. That's the starting point. Everything else sort of builds from there.
Okay, three types, got it. But here's where, for me, it starts getting really interesting and honestly immediately useful. The texts talk about suffering or maybe pain in a way that goes much deeper than just feeling bad. It really makes you think about how we experience pain.
Yes, exactly. There's this really powerful distinction they make between what they call the uninstructed ordinary person and the instructed noble disciple. It's about how they each deal with painful feelings when they arise. So the uninstructed person, they're said to experience two feelings. There's the physical pain itself, sure, that's the first thing, but then there's second mental pain. That's the sorrow, the complaining, the anguish that follows. The analogy they use is really vivid. It's like being struck by two darts or two arrows. And this person, they say, can't really rise out of the pit of that bodily painful feeling because of the second arrow.
Wow, okay, two darts. So the first one is the actual event, the physical sensation maybe, but the second one, that sounds like our reaction to the first one.
That's the insight. Yes. A lot of our suffering isn't the initial thing, it's how we respond to it. It's that second dart, the one we, in a sense, throw at ourselves. Now, contrast that with the instructed noble disciple. This person experiences only one feeling, the physical pain, just the first dart. They don't have the sorrow, the lamentation, the mental anguish. They don't get hit by that second dart. And crucially, because of that, they're able to rise out of the pit. It shows that understanding this can fundamentally change our experience of pain.
That's huge. That distinction is critical. So if that's the case, what does this tradition tell us to do about these reactions, about avoiding that second dart?
Well, it leads directly to this instruction to abandon certain what they call underlying tendencies. The word is anusaya. These are sort of deep-seated habits of reacting. So for pleasant feelings, the advice is to abandon the underlying tendency towards lust or attachment, rāga. For painful feelings, it's about abandoning the tendency towards aversion or resistance, paṭigha. And for those neutral, neither pleasant nor painful feelings, the instruction is to abandon the underlying tendency towards ignorance, avijjā, basically not understanding their true nature.
Okay, that makes sense for painful and neutral feelings, but abandoning attachment to pleasant feelings. The texts even say, and this feels really counterintuitive, that pleasant feelings should be seen as painful. That sounds, well, a bit grim. Like we're supposed to reject happiness. How should you understand that?
Yeah, it does sound jarring at first, doesn't it? But it's not about denying pleasure or saying happiness is bad. Not at all. When the text says regard pleasant feelings as inherently painful, dukkhā, it's pointing to a deeper truth. Painful feelings, yes, see them clearly as a dart or thorn, salatihaba. Neutral feelings, see them as impermanent, aniccaradehaba. But for pleasant feelings, seeing them as painful means recognizing their conditional nature. They arise, they feel good, but they will pass. They're impermanent too. It's the clinging to them, the attachment, the demand that they continue. That's what ultimately leads to suffering or dissatisfaction when they inevitably change or disappear. So it's about seeing the whole picture, including the potential for future disappointment built into clinging to present pleasure.
Ah, okay. So it's not the pleasure itself, but the attachment and the inevitable loss that's seen as problematic, as dukkha. That makes more sense. All right, so to work with these reactions, we need to understand where the feelings come from in the first place. What's the origin story, according to these texts?
They're incredibly clear and consistent on this. Feelings are described as contact-born, contact-rooted, contact-sourced, and contact-conditioned. Basically, phassa. What this means is a feeling only arises when there's contact between one of our sense organs, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, or even the mind itself as a sense organ and a corresponding sense object, like a sight, a sound, a smell, a taste, a physical touch, or even a thought or memory. No contact, no feeling.
So it's not just some random thing that pops up from nowhere. There's always a trigger, an interaction happening.
Exactly. It's based on conditions. There's a great analogy. They use the two sticks. Imagine rubbing two sticks together. Heat and fire arise because of the friction, right?
Right.
But if you separate the sticks, the heat and fire cease. It's the same with feelings. They arise dependent on that contact, and they cease when the contact ceases. It really emphasizes their dependent nature.
Okay. And, this focus on contact and conditions, it seems to push back against a common idea, maybe a simplification, that everything we feel, especially suffering, is just down to our past actions, our karma. How does this wisdom address that view?
That's a really important point. And yes, the source material we're looking at specifically counters the view that all experiences, pleasant, painful, or neutral, are solely the result of past karma, or pubbakata hetu. It argues that's too simplistic. Instead, it offers a much more nuanced, and you could say holistic view. It actually lists 8 distinct causes for feelings arising.
8 different causes, not just karma. Okay, what are they?
Yeah, 8. So the text mentioned feelings arising from 1. Imbalances related to bile, pitta sammohanipi. 2. Related to phlegm, samaha sammohanipi. 3. Related to wind or airs in the body, thada sammohanipi. 4. A combination of these bodily humors, sanipattikanipi. 5. Changes in seasons, uttapattimajanipi. 6. Consequences of carelessness or sort of uneven circumstances, visamapattimajanipi. 7. External causes like injuries or assaults, opakkamikanipi. And then number 8 is the results of past karma, kamma vipakkamajanipi. So you see, karma is definitely one factor, but it's listed alongside many others. It discourages us from just blaming everything on past actions and encourages looking at the whole picture, body, environment, actions, everything.
That's incredibly comprehensive. It really paints a much bigger picture of why we feel what we feel. So, okay, we understand the types of feelings. We know they arise from contact. We know there are multiple causes. How do we actually work with them? What's the practical method for lessening that suffering, especially that second arrow?
The absolute key, the core practice mentioned over and over, is cultivating mindfulness, sati, and clear comprehension, sampajanya. This means developing a consistent, non-judgmental awareness. Being observant of your body, of your feelings as they arise and pass, of your mind states, of the mental qualities present. It's about being fully aware in everything you do. The texts mention simple things like being aware when you're walking, looking, eating, even falling asleep or waking up. And specifically with feelings, when one arises pleasant, painful, or neutral, the instruction is to know it clearly, to recognize, okay, this pleasant feeling has arisen. It depends on this body, this contact. But this body, this contact, they're impermanent, they're conditioned. So this feeling that depends on them, it can't be permanent either.
So it's like you're constantly reminding yourself of the impermanent nature of the feeling as you're experiencing it?
Exactly. It's an active investigation in the moment. By continuously observing feelings as impermanent, anakanapasi, as dissolving, vedanāsaṃyuttaṃ, seeing them with dispassion, vedanāsaṃyuttaṃ, recognizing their cessation, eradicating, and seeing them as relinquished, paṭigha, by doing that continuously. Those underlying tendencies we talked about, the lust for pleasure, the aversion to pain, the ignorance about neutral feelings, they naturally begin to weaken and are eventually abandoned.
It reminds me of that analogy you mentioned earlier, the oil lamp, watching it burn down.
Yes, that's a perfect analogy used in the texts. Just like an oil lamp burns only as long as it has oil and a wick. And when the oil and wick are used up, the flame just goes out, right? It becomes cool. Similarly, feelings are dependent on conditions, like the body in contact. When those conditions change or when the body eventually breaks up, the feelings associated also cease. Understanding this deeply, realizing that all these conditioned feelings, when you don't cling to them, will eventually become cool. That itself is liberating.
Okay. And is there a specific overall framework or path laid out for achieving this kind of liberation, this cooling of suffering?
Yes, absolutely. The Noble Eightfold Path is explicitly presented as the way, the practice, paṭigha, that leads to the full understanding and cessation of feelings and ultimately suffering. This path includes, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And within that, particularly through right mindfulness and right concentration, the practice involves developing deep states of meditative absorption, the jhanas. These are states of profound calm and insight. And through practicing these jhanas, there is a process described as successively calming and ceasing various formations or deep mental patterns, akara. Like verbal thought ceases in the first jhana, subtle thinking in the second, the feeling of joy in the third, even the breath seems to cease in the fourth. And there are even higher states beyond the form jhanas, leading ultimately to the possibility of the cessation of perception and feeling altogether. This whole gradual path works towards rooting out greed, hatred, and delusion at their deepest level.
Wow. Okay, so this deep dive really shows it's not just about those initial three feelings we started with, pleasant, painful, neutral. The teachings seem to slice and dice feelings in many different ways, depending on what they're trying to explain.
That's a really important takeaway, yes. It highlights how flexible and context-dependent these teachings are. It's not a rigid, one-size-fits-all system. So besides the three, the texts sometimes talk about feelings in just two ways: physical feelings, caīka, and mental feelings, cetāsica. Simple enough. Then there's a breakdown into 5 ways, which refines the basic 3. This uses the faculties, adukkha, physical pleasure, dukkhā, mental pleasure or joy, sammana, mental pain or grief, dommana, and equanimity, upekkha. Then you have 6 ways, classified according to which sense door the feeling arose from feeling born of eye contact, ear contact, nose, tongue, body, or mind contact.
Okay, wait, it keeps going. 2, 5, 6. That's already quite a few ways to look at them.
It does. It shows incredible psychological detail. Then there are 18 ways. This takes the 6 sense contacts and considers that through each contact you could experience mental pleasure, mental pain, or equanimity. So 6 times 3 gives you 18 avenues of exploration for the mind. And then 36 ways. This one distinguishes between feelings connected to ordinary life and feelings connected to renunciation or spiritual practice. So you have 6 kinds of household-based or domestic, joy, grief, and equanimity, and 6 kinds related to renunciation. That's 12. Times 3, pleasure, pain, equanimity, gives 36. And finally, sometimes they talk about 108 feelings. That's simply taking the 36 types and applying them to the past, the present, and the future. 36 past, 36 present, 36 future equals 108. It sounds complex, but the point isn't just the numbers. It's showing how meticulously every shade of feeling was analyzed to understand its nature and how to work with it.
That's astonishingly detailed, and it doesn't stop there, right? There's another really important distinction you mentioned between worldly and spiritual forms of even things like joy and happiness.
Absolutely. This is crucial. The texts make a clear distinction between what they call carnal or worldly sammyutta experiences and unworldly or spiritual niramita ones. This applies to joy, piti, happiness, sukhā, equanimity, upekkha, and even liberation, vimukkhā. So worldly joy, happiness, or equanimity, that's the kind that arises from contact with the 5 physical senses. Seeing nice sights, hearing pleasant sounds, good smells, tastes, touches, things that are generally considered desirable and enchanting in the world.
Right, that's the stuff we usually chase after, isn't it? The fleeting pleasure from external things.
Pretty much, yeah. But then there's the spiritual or niramisa, joy, happiness, and equanimity. This is the kind that arises from inner states, particularly the deep meditative states of the jhanas we talked about. These states are free from sensual desires and unwholesome mental states. And the texts consistently describe this niramisa happiness and joy as more excellent and sublime than the worldly kind. The highest form, they say, comes from a mind that's completely freed from the roots of suffering, greed, hatred, and delusion. Here's something really mind-bending. Even that state of cessation of perception and feeling, that profound meditative attainment where conventional experience stops, even that is identified in some contexts as a form of happiness. A very profound, subtle form of peace and liberation. It completely challenges our everyday ideas of what happiness even is.
Wow. Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We went from the basic 3 feelings to where they come from, the whole 2 arrows idea, understanding their impermanence, the path to working with them, and then all these different ways of classifying them, and this crucial distinction between worldly happiness and a deeper spiritual kind. We've seen it's not just about feeling good or bad, but this incredibly complex interplay of causes and our reactions. And that this ancient wisdom offers really practical tools.
Exactly. It's not just, interesting philosophy to think about. It really offers a toolkit, a way to engage differently with every single moment, every feeling that arises. By understanding these Vedana more deeply, as this tradition suggests, you really can gain insight into your own automatic reactions.
Yeah.
And that insight holds the potential for, well, significantly more freedom from suffering, no matter what life happens to bring your way.
So, maybe a final thought for everyone listening to ponder. Consider this. If even that ultimate state, the profound cessation of all perception and all feeling, can be understood within this framework as a kind of ultimate happiness, a sublime peace, what does that suggest about the real nature of happiness itself? And perhaps more importantly, where are you looking for it in your own life? Something to think about.